Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Kelly. Steve, appreciate that very much, and very kind introduction, and thank you for the very warm welcome. Colorado has been very welcoming to me. Steve talked about how we were successful in winning this primary. I can tell you that no state had a bigger impact on the last election. I mean this in all sincerity than Colorado. You gave us the opportunity to compete, and we came this close. But we got a great boost from the people here in Colorado, so you will always have a very, very warm place in my heart. So thank you very much for that. You know, on a day like today, I mean, I was listening to the depressing talk of Hugh Hewitt. He generally depresses me because he talks about Ohio State football all the time. But listening to him and talking about the heavy things that have gone on here in the last couple weeks, it can lead to despair. But we're Americans. We have to remind ourselves that America is in our hands. This is our country, not 9 Supreme Court justices, not 435 members of Congress, not 100 senators, and certainly not one president. This is our country, and if we want to take this country back, then we have to get about doing that. People ask me all the time, why am I running for president? I'm running for president because I believe we can do that. We have a problem in this country, and it's a problem of a lack of leadership and of a lack of vision. A vision that can unite this country, that can bring us together. Because I traveled 30 states in the last campaign. I campaigned in even more than those 30 states. I got a chance to meet Americans from all walks of life. And here's what I found out. America and the American people are still a good, decent, moral people who are looking for someone to help bring us back together. That's what I know to be true. But what we have in office right now is a president who is the divider in chief. He looks at every opportunity to divide America, to try to separate us, all for political advantage. We need a leader who understands how to unite us, even in the tough things. You know, we can find leaders who can unite on areas like, well, let's cut taxes. Well, that's the easy thing to do. Everybody's for cutting taxes. But where can you find a leader that's going to unite us on the things that are really divisive things in America? We had a decision today that probably looks as divisive as anything that's ever been done by a Supreme Court. We had a United States Supreme Court say that the only reason that you could possibly oppose changing marriage laws in America is because you hate people of the same sex who want to marry. Now, that is not true. It's a decision based on a lie. It's a decision based on fundamental untruths. And yet it is the law of the land. So how do we heal ourselves from that? Ladies and gentlemen, the foundation of every good and healthy society is the family unit. And my heart aches tonight. My heart aches tonight because that family unit has further been assaulted. And as a result of this decision and of previous decisions over the past several years by many courts, more and more children are going to grow up without a father in the home. More and more children are going to be taught in schools things that are going to confuse them and lead them down paths that are not healthy for them. All because we have leaders who don't have the courage to get up and fight for the truth. Let's be honest. Look at our leaders for the last 10 years. I was in the United States Senate in 2004. There was a decision made in 2003 a decision called Lawrence versus Texas. And I said at that time that within 10 years, if we don't do something right now, within 10 years, gay marriage will be the law of the land. People looked at me and said, "You are crazy. What are you talking about? This is an imaginary problem." That's what I was told. It was an imaginary problem. And I said, no, now is the time. We have to, while there's still support in America for traditional marriage, let's pass a constitutional amendment. And so I helped draft one along with Senator Wayne Allard from here in Colorado. And we pushed for a constitutional amendment in the United States Senate in 2004 against most of my caucus behind closed doors saying, "Don't do this. All you're going to do is rile up things. This is not a problem." And we were able to, in spite of that opposition, to push. And it's the only time the United States Senate ever voted on a constitutional amendment to define marriage as between a man and a woman. After I left the Senate involuntarily, no one else carried that flag. No one else has made the case. Why are we losing the public debate? You can't win an argument you don't make. And we have been bullied into silence, into not making the arguments, and not standing up for the truth. And here's where we are. We are now faced not just with a society that's going to say, and is saying, that marriage has nothing to do with children. That's the impact of this decision. Marriage has nothing to do with children. Marriage has to do with adults. And what makes adults happy? Not what is necessary for children to be raised in a home where they have their birthright, a mother and a father who loves them and raises them into adulthood, into good citizens in America. We have an obligation to fight, but we need leaders who are poised for that fight. You're going to see a lot of people come up on stage, and they're going to talk about a lot of issues. I'm going to talk about a few others. But if we lose this issue, there's been studies done over the last several years by the far left and the far right, and they say the same thing. Why is America hollowing out in the middle? Why is it that we don't have the opportunity to have a vibrant middle of America anymore? Why do people feel like there's no hope, there's no opportunity to rise in America anymore? Why is that? And we have folks from the far right, like Charles Murray, who's a libertarian, and from the far left, like Robert Putnam from Harvard, who've written books, and they say the same thing. That the principal reason the middle of America is hollowing out, the breakdown of the American family. And now we have just said that that doesn't matter, that families don't matter. Do you know, for the first time in the history of our country, a majority of children being born out of wedlock are going to be born in homes where the father is still living in that home, but they don't marry anymore. Why? Because marriage isn't about children anymore. We're all recognizing, right and left, that families are important. And politicians don't have the courage to stand up and articulate to the American public that if you want a strong economy, you better have a strong family, and you better have a strong nuclear family, and you better have government on the side of that family. I can tell you, I can talk about a fair and flat tax, a tax plan that I'm going to propose that will get rid of the IRS and institute a fair and flat tax. I can talk about a regulatory plan on day one that will take every job-killing regulation that the Obama administration has put in place and get rid of it on day one and to create jobs in America again. I can talk about a trade package that's going to be fair to American workers. That when countries overseas dump products and use unfair trading practices, that will actually enforce those in the United States of America under a president I can talk about an immigration policy that says that over the last 20 years, we've brought in 35 million primarily unskilled workers, both legal and illegally, into this country. That's over 10% of the population of this country, almost all of whom are unskilled, competing for the same jobs that I just was talking about earlier, of middle America, who's seen their incomes decline. Median income is declining in America. Wages have flatlined for 20 years. And I can talk about a plan that's going to not just enforce our border security and track visas so we make sure that people who are here on visa overstays are returned, not just an e-verify system that makes sure people who are working in this country are legally working in this country in all businesses in America, but also reduce the number of legal immigrants in this country to give workers a chance who are here legally and who are from this country to be able to get good paying jobs to support their families. And I can talk about a manufacturing plan that's going to put people back to work and creating jobs that support families in manufacturing and energy and construction. That's a bold economic plan that's going to unify this country. But even if we do all that and we lose the family, America is not going to be well and not going to be healthy. And you can say, well, what can we do to help the family? You know what the most powerful tool a president has? It's the bully pulpit. It's to be able to stand up before the American public, get on TV, talk to the business community, talk to the entertainment community, talk to the news media, and drive a message about what's good and healthy for America. Now, this president uses his bully pulpit to divide America. We see it all the time. Or to pursue a progressive cause like global warming. And he uses it very effectively. But now imagine a president who will actually use the power of the bully pulpit to stand and fight for the American family, to talk about the importance of men and women coming together and raising children in a home. Go through the reality of what we're doing to our children in America today. Instead of putting up people in the gallery who have done heroic things, let's put up the young men and women in America who are being raised in families that are dysfunctional because of government policy and because of neglect. And open up to America what the real problems confronting this country. We have an opportunity with real leadership to unite America. Everybody wants their children to be raised in a healthy, happy home. But that means we have to have policies that encourage that. We have to have policies that bring us together. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an opportunity in this race. If we want to win, and I want to win, we have to win the voters that feel like neither political party cares about them. And you know what? They've stayed home. If you look at every election analysis, it wasn't evangelical conservatives that stayed home. The people that stayed home in the last election, the very people I'm talking about. They're blue-collar conservatives. In fact, I wrote a book last year called Blue Collar Conservative. And if you look at the states where most of the people stayed home, they were Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, just right across all the way through Iowa. And they stayed home because Barack Obama was talking about what we can do to transfer wealth and tax the rich and give to those in redistribution, talking about giving benefits away like health care. And guess what? American workers who've seen their wages go nowhere, who see the loss of jobs because Obamacare has made hiring people so expensive, they know that doesn't work, but they want to know we care. At the convention in 2012, I spoke on Tuesday night. It was a wonderful night. We had small business person after small business person walk out on stage and tell their story. And people out in the crowd held up placards saying, "We built that," in response to President Obama's "he didn't build that." I'd say there were probably 10 small business people that walked out there. But guess what? There wasn't a single worker who took that stage that night. 90% of American workers don't own a small business. They work for a living, and we don't ever talk about them. You want to be successful in winning elections? Then we have to nominate someone who's going to paint a picture of the future of America. Have included in that picture working men and women who want to have jobs that provide for themselves and their families and provide good benefits. And you know how you do that? You make things in America again. We have the opportunity now because with a proper tax code, proper regulatory environment, proper trade environment, and energy costs at the lowest of any other country in the world, for as far as the eye can see, that's the game changer that allows us the opportunity with sound policies to do what no one ever thought could happen. 10 years ago, if you'd have said America would be the number one energy producer in the world, you know what? People would have laughed at you and said, oh, you're just a chauvinist. You're just a flag-waving chauvinist for America. But we are the number one energy producer in the world today. How about that? And with someone laser beam focused on bringing back manufacturing, on bringing back over trillions of dollars of assets of companies who built things overseas and have kept that money over. Why? Because we have ridiculously high corporate taxes in this country. We slashed corporate taxes, which I will do. You allow those repatriated dollars come back, trillions of dollars to build factories and equipment here in America. We will put America back to work. You want to win Ohio? You want to win Pennsylvania? You put forth a plan that speaks to working men and women. They will come out because you're talking about them, and you have the courage to get up and talk about also their family and what we can do to help them. We have a chance to recreate that Reagan coalition. The Reagan coalition, which long away left us, because in part we left them. We've been so fixated on growth. I'm for growth. Chapter in my book I have is called A Rising Tide Lifts All Boats. By the way, that wasn't Ronald Reagan, that was John F. Kennedy who said that. But it's true, except if your boat has a hole in it. And ladies and gentlemen, just look around. 74% of Americans don't have college degrees. What is their opportunity in the world today in America without manufacturing, construction, and jobs that allow them to get skills and to rise in society? Yes, we should talk about growth, but it's not enough. We have a chance to change the electoral map because they're not going to run a race moving toward the middle. Hillary Clinton? No. She's going to run out of the same chapter and verse that Barack Obama did. Divide and conquer. We have an opportunity with a strong message on family, a strong message on the economy, and a principled leader with experience and a steady hand on national security. Hillary Clinton's tenure as Secretary of State will go down, as Hugh Hewitt said, as maybe the worst tenure of any Secretary of State in history. But you're not going to beat a Secretary of State in a debate unless you have someone who understands and is steeped in the issues that are going to be part of that debate. And that the American public can look at and say, they have what it takes to be able to be the president in a critical time in our country's history. I was in Israel about 8 months ago, and one of Netanyahu's most senior advisors said to me, Senator, please go back and tell the American public that in all likelihood, the next president will have to be a wartime president. And I don't mean just a little regional war. What the president is doing across the world is setting us up for a major conflict. And we better have someone who's prepared to deal with that. I can tell you, as someone who has been warning of the threat of Iran, I authored and we actually passed a bill that put sanctions on Iran's nuclear program 10 years ago when I was warning about the threat of Iran. I wrote articles 10 years ago talking about the gathering storm of the 21st century, of a rising Iran, of radical Sunni terrorists, Russia, China, all rising up to confront America in its weakness. Because I feared that we didn't have the courage to go out. And I said this at a time when the anti-war sentiment was very, very high. We were not doing well in Iraq. It was before the surge, before we won. And I was out talking about the real threat by not being engaged in the world. That was not a popular thing to say, nor was my comments on the marriage issue in 2003. But they were both right. They both showed leadership and understanding of the problems that confront our country and the solutions that we have to be strong enough to be for and articulate to the American public. We have to have the courage to tell the truth. 2 months ago, I was featured in an online magazine, which is usually a good thing. But this online magazine was ISIS online magazine. I was featured under a column that said, "In the words of our enemy." And there was a picture of me. Actually, a very nice picture, I might add. And then a quote from me. It was a quote where I laid out who they were. I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't call them terrorists. Oh, they may be terrorists, but that's not who they are. That's what they do, but it's not who they are. I didn't call them, what does Barack Obama call them? He won't use the word terrorism. I'm drawing a blank. Violent extremists, thank you very much. They are violent and they are extremists, but they are radical Muslims, is who they are. And someone has the courage to lay out in detail what that means. Radical Islam, as you see from ISIS, I identified who that enemy was. I said what it would take to defeat them. I laid out a plan, and they put it there. They know who I am, and I know who they are. And the next president of the United States better be a president who our enemies know is someone not to be trifled with, and our friends know that they can trust us when things get tough. Final point I want to make. How do you know whether any of this is real? What do I mean by that? You're going to have a lot of people come before you here in Colorado and out west in your states, and they're going to give great speeches and they're going to talk about all the things they want to do. How do you know? I know none of you have ever been disappointed by electing a member of Congress who's gone and done things that you didn't think they would do when they went to Washington. None of you are disappointed by the leadership you see in Washington, D.C. of the Republican Party today, or our leadership in the Congress and the House and Senate. So how do you know? How do you know whether the person that stands up here and says they're going to do all these things isn't just another one of those folks who goes to Washington and then just does something else? You got to look at their record. You got to look at their record, not just on the easy stuff. There's lots of easy stuff that Republicans vote on that's, well, it's just easy. Like I said, how hard is it to say I voted for tax cuts? Talk about the tough stuff. Talk about the stuff that you get beat up on because you stand for it. That the media loves to just grill you because you have the courage to stand up and fight liberal orthodoxy. And do it on the main stage. Do it where it matters for the country and where everybody is focused. Ladies and gentlemen, I've stood for those things. I've been a leader not just on moral and cultural issues. Yes, I have, and very few do. But I've also been a leader on national security issues. I was the author of the Welfare Reform Bill and helped pass that through the United States Senate. I authored health. Anybody have a health savings accounts? I introduced health savings accounts for the first time and fought for them and got them instituted in the Congress. Yes, I have a 92% conservative voting record. Yes, representing a state with 1.5 million more Democrats than Republicans. All of those things, and I've won. I won in a 60% Democratic district against an incumbent. I won in a 70% Democratic district for re-election against another incumbent. I ran against a third incumbent for the United States Senate with 1.5 million more Democrats than Republicans against James Carville and Paul Begala in 1994, and Bill Clinton campaigned as much in that state as my opponent did. And I won on the issue of health care. Look at the track record. Look at who can win in the states we need to win, and look at someone who's willing to stand up on the tough issues, because if they can stand up on the tough ones, then you can count on the rest. Thank you, and God bless you. Thank you, sir. Senator?
Rick Santorum, Pennsylvania's own. Colorado loves him. I bet everyone in the hall is thinking I'd love to have a conversation with Rick Santorum. To stand in for you and have that conversation for a few minutes now, which we will also do with each of his fellow contenders for the Republican presidential nomination, 5 of them who speak tomorrow. Someone that you know and admire from his writing in the Washington Examiner, his frequent appearances on Fox News or talk radio. For now, a conversation with 2016 presidential hopeful Rick Santorum. Welcome, Byron York.
Thank you very much. Been kind of a slow news day, but we'll look for something to talk about tonight. Thanks for your remarks, Senator Santorum. I thought we would start with the Supreme Court. In particular, John Roberts, the Chief Justice, delivers a very strong dissent in the marriage case, but yesterday kind of twisted himself into a pretzel to keep Obamacare alive, as he had done before in 2012 in the Commerce Clause challenge. September 29, 2005, Senator Rick Santorum votes to confirm John Roberts and says he will be an excellent Supreme Court justice. It's always a gamble when you have to vote on a nominee. What do you think about him now?
Well, I mean, if you look at most of his opinions actually are pretty good. But he's made mistakes twice now on Obamacare. You can say, well, he deferred to Congress and tried to give Congress the benefit of the doubt. You can say that's a conservative approach to things. I don't necessarily look at it that way. I think you should look at the plain language of a statute and interpret it the way the language is written by the Congress. But I would say that whether the decision would have been one way or the other, the bottom line is it's still going to take the Congress and a president with a Congress to repeal Obamacare. The court's not going to be able to repeal Obamacare, even if they had gotten rid of these subsidies. I think it was clear, unfortunately, that many Republicans were already planning to extend those subsidies for another couple of years anyways. I don't think there would have been any effort to repeal Obamacare had the court decided otherwise. I'm less concerned about that issue with that decision than I am about today's decision. And the reason is because ultimately it's going to take electing a president who has the courage and a vision to be able to go out and not just articulate the reasons why Obamacare needs to be repealed, but also provide a vision for how health care can be provided by putting patients back in charge of their health care and having the support necessary from the federal government to be able to make sure that everyone will have the opportunity to buy health insurance that suits their needs.
Let me go on, though, and ask you about this marriage decision, which is now a done deal. And I think we're headed into a lot of litigation A Christian university would have married student housing. Can they turn down a gay couple? A Christian adoption agency would like to place children with traditional marriages. You're going to see lawsuits about all sorts of stuff. My colleague Tim Carney at the Washington Examiner, a very conservative fellow, said that concerns over religious liberty are basically the terms of surrender that conservatives are making in the culture war. What's going to happen?
I would agree with that. I mean, look, I think religious liberty issues are incredibly important. I talked about those 10 years ago, and they are real. It's not just going to be this cases you talked about. What this court said is that anybody who does not toe the line is going to be viewed the same way as someone who doesn't support other civil rights, which is you will be a bigot. I know that comes as a hard thing for people to hear, but that's how the law is going to look at you. And we don't tolerate bigots in America. And the law won't, the government won't tolerate bigots. This is a huge issue that Colorado Christians going to have to do. Every institution that stands by any type of biblical worldview is going to have to deal with the reality that the government is going to tell you that you can no longer believe this and get any accommodation from the government. And that includes 501c3s, that includes any kind of contracts, be able to work for the government, all of these things. I know people don't think that's going to happen. It is happening. It's not going to happen. It is happening. And that's why I would make the argument that this can't be a done deal. You can't be a done deal. Because, look, if it's a done...
Can you amend the Constitution?
Can you amend the Constitution? Without vision, the people will perish. You know this. I said this in my talk. We haven't fought on this issue. We haven't even begun to articulate why marriage is an important issue. We've been bullied into silence. Our politicians don't talk about it. Now we're going to have to talk about it. Now we're going to see the results of it, and people are going to say, wait a minute, I didn't think that it was going to affect us this way. Why are we doing this? And maybe then we'll be able to have the conversation. Because to this point, I'll give you an example. I went to Yale University in 2012 and gave a speech there in front of the Yale Political Union. Usually gets about 300 or 400 people. I went to talk about the nature, this was the question. Resolve, the government is destroying the American family. I went there and spoke, September of 2012, 2,000 Yale students showed up. And I went through and I talked about what is the family? What is marriage? What is the impact of marriage and family on society? What is the state of marriage and family today? What is the impact on children and society of the state of marriage today? What is the impact on government? I walked through a chapter and verse, 45 minutes, no histrionics, just the facts. For an hour and a half after that speech, Yale students lined up. I stood in front of the podium. They lined up, and you know what they said to me, one after another after another? You know what they said? I've never heard any of that before. We're losing because we're not trying to win. We're trying not to offend.
Let me move on now to something that's an important topic of yours, and that is the voters' number one topic, continues to be, which is the economy. We heard you talking just now about Americans who have seen their standard of living decline over the past 15 or 20 years, not just in the economic downturn, going way before that. In your book, Blue Collar Conservatives, you mentioned Ronald Reagan many times. And you're not at all disrespectful, but you're saying that was a long time ago and times are different now. What have you learned? What have you learned about the economy that is different in the last 10 or 15 years than it was in those Reagan years that conservatives remember so fondly?
Well, Reagan said many times how he had an economic policy, addressed the maladies of the conditions that we were in today. Are they good policy for today? Of course they are. I mean, they're about lower taxes, less government, less regulation, pro-growth. All of those are right. The problem is our ability through those particular measures to have an impact on the economy, and particularly for those who are not succeeding, are more limited than they were back in 1980. Well, back in 1980, we had tax rates of 70%. We had a tax environment where we really could dramatically change the tax laws and have a stimulative effect. Not as much today, because rates are, even though they're high, they're not as high as they once were. So just cutting taxes isn't going to be enough to be able to make sure that the economic benefits flow to everybody. Ronald Reagan came in during a time of deindustrialization. It was occurring, it just began to occur before he came into office, and it continued. Why? Because the industrial machine of America was antiquated and couldn't compete because of high energy prices and other things. Now we're at a point where we are not an industrialized country as we once were. And as a result, the opportunities that were around in 1980, still around in aren't here today. And so we have to look to, well, what can we do specifically to help those voters who want to be able to get skills and to be able to rise, but are not going to want to go to college, don't need to go to college, don't want to go to college, and are maybe not suited to go to college. What are we going to do to help them? And that's why I said that the key for us as a party is to be the party of the American industrial worker and create the opportunity for manufacturing jobs to come back. And we can do that because we have low, stable energy prices for as far as the eye can see that offsets a lot of the increased costs that it takes because you're hiring more expensive American workers. That is the opportunity we have. If we get all the other policies right, we can go to working Americans and say, here's my economic picture, and here's where you are in it. And that's the difference that we need to articulate.
Let me ask you about immigration. The United States gives out about 1 million green cards every year. Those are immigrants who are granted permanent legal status in the United States for life, can become citizens if they choose. Gallup has asked this question for years and years and years, and I'm going to ask you the exact question that Gallup asked, so imagine you've just picked up the phone. It's very simple. It says, in your view, should immigration be kept at its present level, increased, or decreased?
I actually proposed, it's on Breitbart.com, it's actually a detailed proposal of what I would do to change the legal immigration system. And I propose, it's 1,050,000 to be exact, is how many we bring in. That's higher than any time in the history of our country. We've had it now for 20 years. The previous high was during the Great Wave from 1880 to 1920. We brought in about a little over 700,000 a year. So we're substantially above that. And what I've suggested is that there are two areas that we need to change on legal immigration. One is something called the visa lottery, which says that the countries where there are very few Americans, we're going to create a lottery system for people to come from countries that are not common ancestries here in America. My question is why? I mean, what is the point of doing that? We're bringing in almost all unskilled workers, and from countries that many of whom are very hostile to this country, to be very honest, which is one of the reasons that we don't bring many people in from those countries. I don't think that's a very sound national security position, nor is it a sound posture for a country that is economically. Second is what's called chain immigration. Up until the 1990s, when someone came into this country, you could bring your minor children and your spouse. That changed. Now you can bring your minor children, your spouse, your parents, your brothers, your sisters, and their spouses into this country. That's an additional 250,000 people a year. The premise that I have when it comes to immigration, if you're an adult living overseas, you should come and qualify on your own, not because your brother's in this country. And it's as simple as that. And those two things...
Let me just...
Those two things will put immigration back in a context. Again, supply and demand works, Byron. I mean, the fact is that we have an increasing supply of labor coming in overseas, and we don't have an expanding market of unskilled jobs to be able to fill those positions.
So just to be clear on this, the answer is decreased.
Yeah, I'm calling for a 25% reduction in legal immigration.
All right. Thank you very much, Senator. Thanks for taking some time to talk.
Thank you.
We can either make this the last